To just welcome our experts here, our education experts, and welcome you all. And our goal is to provide some basic factual information about the education issues facing Vermont, and so have plenty of time for Q&A. So Rebecca Holcombe, who most of you will know, she's our one of our two state reps. She's going to be our facilitator, and I will let her introduce the rest of our panel. I want to let you know two things. One is I'm going to pass this around, and if you'd like to be on the Norwich Dems email list, I typically now am sending something out once a week. Please sign up here, so I'll pass this around. And then the other thing is, we do have chocolate chip cookies. I will pass those around too.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to hold this up because I think this is recording. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out on a cold night. I obviously feel this is a very important issue. The fact that you're here today suggests that you think it's very important. And I've heard numerous people request if it was being recorded so they could watch remotely.
This is a really important issue. What's happening with education and what is the impact on property taxes? We're hearing that over and over. I want to apologize for the fact that there's no cider. That's my fault because we ran late in the legislature and I didn't have time to go home. But there is water and cookies, and please do eat them. Cookies and chocolate make everything go better, and it's part of breaking bread together. I first want to give a shout out to Linda Gray, who is amazing for pulling together these kinds of community conversations. This is how we do democracy. We sit down, we share some information, we talk about what matters. And we need your input. Our school board reps need your input. Jay has been very active and will be testifying this session. I'll explain how in a minute. But we really do need to have these conversations because there's nothing really more important than the future of our communities and the future of our children. So thank you again for coming today. Thank you, Linda, for making this possible. I want to thank Jam for showing up because I've heard from lots of people that they do want to watch this. Not just now remotely, but also later. I want to introduce our panelists. I am Rebecca Holcombe. I am your state rep. I've had a chance to meet with many of you. I see BJ down in the back, and thank you also for these conversations. And I want to, Jim Maslin will be coming in. He's chasing me from the last meeting. We work in the legislature right now to talk about these issues. We are in the process of hearing from the administration about what they think is important, but we are also working very closely with our school boards. And what we're hearing is really raising questions about how well the policy that's being proposed is going to work for our communities. And there's some things that make us unique, but there are also some ways in which we're similar to the rest of the state. Jay and I had the privilege of serving together on the Redistricting Task Force. You may remember that Jay and I are both failures, according to the governor. We wear that proudly. But part of the work of that task force was to actually get some data behind some of the conversations that were taking place. And Jay is going to present some of that data. Incredibly grateful. This is the kind of work by citizens who show up because they care, and it makes a real difference. So, real gratitude. Jay is also a resident of Strafford, also part of our larger community. And Jay also served as the superintendent in the Dresden Hanover schools in Norwich, and has worked throughout your career in education and brought incredibly rich experience, including working with these regional shared services that was at the heart of the task force report. This is Nic Cook. No, I'm kidding. Poor Nic Cook has been working so hard and has had a bunch of things just implode and can't be here tonight. So I want to give deep, deep appreciation to Mary Chen, who is a longtime educator also on the Thetford School Board. And we wanted to have Thetford and Norwich come because they actually share some real similarities, some concerns about how to support their the high school education of their kids, but also how to make sure that this plan as it unrolls and the governance changes are, they're being debated right now, and the funding changes, how that might affect their community. Actually very similar in some ways to the kinds of challenges that you're going to hear from Neil Odell, who's on the Norwich board. So I really want to thank you for being willing to stand up and present Nick's slides. You can speak to your experience on the Thetford board and your work with TA, but we want you to know that we know that you're really filling in, and you did not develop these slides, but you bring tremendous expertise. So Thank you. And then the last member, many of you know if you live in Norwich, is Neil Odell. Neil is a former past director of the VSBA, so you have been involved in issues around education. I don't call this bill education reform. It really chafes me that people call it education transformation because it's really governance and funding change, not education. And I just appreciate, Neil, that you have at the state level tried to put the kids back in education. So really appreciate that because that is why we're here. It's why we have schools. And you've been just a tremendous resource to me and my work and my advocacy in the legislature for our community. So thank you for being here tonight. So our goal, because it's really a protest against some of the data-free and expertise-free policymaking that's going on, we are going to try, and you're laughing because it literally took us three months. We cried too. It literally took us 3 months to get very basic data out of the Agency of Education that could even inform how some of these policies would affect our communities. So we wanted to start by sharing some information, both about what's driving costs, why are school budgets going up, why is that affecting property taxes, so that when your school board members talk about what they're grappling with in the budgeting process and what they're thinking about in the context of governance, you have some information behind it. Because we are making very serious, very consequential decisions with long-term implications for our communities, for our children, and for the state. And we feel that it's our public trust, it's our responsibility to do our due diligence in that process. So that's the goal tonight. What we're going to do is get some information. I'm going to ask Jay to start by giving us a little bit of background. Linda's going to help me by advancing the slides. And then we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit from Thetford and Norwich, and they're doing somewhat parallel presentations. And I'll tell you, Nick, when you're speaking. But it's not going to be anything you haven't heard, but it is on a scale that maybe you haven't considered. And I think that's an important context for this conversation. And then we'll turn it over to you to get your questions at the end and really open the conversation. Yep. Oh, shoot, I already spilled water.
Neil, turn your laptop. How do I advance the slide?
Just no, I think it's like the forward and backwards arrow in the lower right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that. And then also, do people want us to turn down some portion of the light so that you can see the slides better, or are they fine?
Maybe down a little.
Maybe dim. Is there a way to dim the ones in the front?
Experiment a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, the ones right in front of the screen, that would be.
Maybe I could advance. Would somebody there be willing to just advance the first slide so Jay can get started while we figure out the lights? Okay, this is the agenda. I think we can go beyond that. Let's go on, let's keep moving. Let's get to the fun stuff. All right, this is the challenge that we've been given repeatedly by the governor. It's the challenge that the task force mentioned in the start of its report, and it is what we are hearing over and over in our communities. Vermont's becoming unaffordable. Housing, healthcare, transportation, food costs, they're all rising faster than wages, and Vermonters are struggling to meet basic needs. There is some difference in experience. I mean, if you're in a community where everybody has health benefits through their employer, that's one thing. If you're buying healthcare off the exchange, you're in a very challenging moment right now. And so we're really seeing those pressures in some communities. Education cannot be insulated from these economic realities. Every sector right now is trying to make every dollar go as far as it can for what matters in education. And that means stability, opportunity, and fairness for the systems and our kids. So that's the context for this particular conversation. And if you could hit the next one. The other piece of context is that in our opening, in his State of the State, the governor said that no state budget without school district mergers would pass. He said, if you don't put mergers in here, I'm not signing the budget. You're not going to get a budget. He's going to keep us there. His Agency of Education is saying big districts do not spend less per pupil than small districts on average. So we're having this fight, even as his own agency is saying, yeah, no, the mergers aren't going to create savings. The way they're going to create savings is by clamping down on spending once the new funding formula is in place. And I just to give you a sense, that is how politicized the conversation has become. This is not an evidence-based conversation anymore. It's just people taking sides. And that's what we're really trying to unpack a little bit right now as a body. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over now to Jay, who is going to talk to us about what we found as a part of the process of extracting data from the Agency of Education.
Sure.
Thanks, Rebecca. And good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. Really appreciate this. And without getting too deep into numbers, I just want to start out by saying one of the biggest challenges we face as a state is a declining population. So we have an education system in which we have numbers of students each year is decreasing. There's a very few spots where populations are steady or slightly increasing, but by and large, we're seeing pretty dramatic decreases in the number of students that we're serving. And so, unfortunately, at the same time that's happening, we have infrastructure we still need to support, that is schools. And then we have costs like health insurance, which don't get talked, well, they get talked about by those of us who are saying, wait a minute, it's not schools spending too much. We have statewide collective bargaining now over health care. That means that for all of the professionals that work in education, for everybody who works in the education system, we're seeing often double-digit increases every single year in the cost of healthcare, and that is a problem that needs to be addressed out of the gate. And you can see the spending here. It's just an upward trend, and again, I said double digits. It's in some cases high double digits that we're seeing these increases, and now as a percent of our overall education spending, we're up to nearly 16%. A sixth of all that education spending that the governor continues to complain about is because of health insurance. And that's outside the control of any local district.
And to ballpark it, if you look at the growth in 1 year of about 110 million, that's about 10 cents on your tax rate, just for context. That's the 1 year growth in healthcare costs. So healthcare is a huge driver of the growth in your property tax.
Right. And just to put it in a little bit more perspective in terms of your local school budget, I just did a quick review before this meeting of all the different proposed budgets that are starting to be published out there. You're seeing it's pretty common that anywhere from 70 to upwards of 75% of schools' budget is staffing. It's salaries and benefits. And so that number it has a huge impact on what we pay for education. Next slide, please. So it's interesting. We're actually the governor will make statements about. I'd feel better if I could stand and see you. This notion that we're spending too much, or that we're being profligate and we're hiring too many people, and our staffing isn't being reduced to mirror the decrease in the student population overall, isn't borne out by the facts. We're seeing the number of classroom teachers actually decrease in the state. And we are seeing an increase, though, in support staff. And without delving into all the different possible explanations for that, the legislature passed Act 173 a couple of years back, which was supposed to put more pressure on districts to be very judicious about how they provide special education and how they fund it. And one of the biggest takeaways in that whole discussion that we had after a pretty extensive study that was performed was that students benefited more from primary instruction with their classroom teacher than by being pulled out of classrooms or by relying solely on support staff to provide modified instruction or adapted lessons. They really benefited much more from that primary instruction from their teacher in the classroom. And we're still not fully, and we haven't implemented Act 173 in anywhere near fully at this point. There should be some savings that would come from full implementation. But again, I have said on a number of occasions at superintendent meetings, could the legislature just not pass any new education-related laws for one session? If we go to everything, I mean, Act 127, was it 129? There's just, and then testing for PCBs, which somehow Norwich was able to kind of escape. All of those laws, they just get passed, they get implemented or not, and then the next thing you know, you're having to close your gym because they found PCBs and Cabot, or Hartford's going through this right now. And where was the plan for what happens when we find them? That's just one example. And we just need to be real careful. And that's something I'll come back to. Next one. So again, this is another one that when we think about what additional costs districts have sort of assumed, there are a lot of them. We have, and anyone who's worked in a classroom lately will tell you that we have students who have higher levels of need. They have higher incidence of mental health issues, behavioral issues, and those needs are being taken care of locally with very little support from the state. And that's a cost. We're funding positions now that we didn't need before. But what this slide shows is just the overall number of positions at the AOE, because the AOE used to be, or the Department of Ed at one time, used to be the agency that provided that sort of support for those additional needs. And now with 30% fewer staff, they're just not that helpful. And I mean, honestly, in my prior life as a superintendent here for 8 years or so, we'd watch as we were told we had to do X, Y, or Z, and then get no guidance or support from the Agency of Education, and that's still happening. My last year, every year, it's really critical for districts to submit their student enrollment data because that's a big factor in determining your tax rate. And it got almost comical. And I think Neil, you were copied on some of those messages. I think Rebecca, I might even have sent some to you because I could not believe that I was having to communicate directly with the data folks at the AOE because they kept saying that our data was wrong. And I kept going to our IT people, our data people, and they would assure me, no, the data's right, it's correct, here it is. They'd show me the email chain that they sent to all the people in the AOE who were supposed to receive it. And then we get a message back saying, oh, we hired this third-party vendor to do something with the data, and for some reason your system is not communicating well with theirs, and so they ended up crediting us for hundreds more students than we had. And we would see the data and say, that's not what we sent you. And they kept on telling us, well, this is what's in the system. And it was so maddening. It took months, literally. And I can't tell you how many messages from me. It ultimately came down to I had to take a handwritten note and just write down with a pencil how many 6th, 7th, and 8th graders we had. And I had to take a picture of it and send it to one of the people at the AOE. And then when they finally cooked all the numbers that they had and they gave it back to us, they said, well, it's still not right, but it's a mistake sort of in your favor, so it should be okay. And they were making us, the Secretary of Ed was mandating that we sign off on this data to say it's accurate. I did mine with a really big caveat. And that's that's just one example. And what was really pretty hilarious is I think it was our first meeting of the task force. A new PR person for the AOE sat in front of us and told us that, oh yeah, we're here for you. We'll have all the data. We're really good at data and all of our data is accurate. Words to that effect. And those of us sitting there looking at each other like, are we on Saturday Night Live or something? Because it was so not true. And I was nice. I didn't jump on this guy because he was brand new and was probably being told that was the situation. But any superintendent, anybody working with data in any of the districts could have told you that was just not accurate.
Yeah, one more point, because
Sure.
there's someone who said this a different way, which is when you look at this, that cut that you see over time, that's actually a cost shift from the state budget to the property tax. So when he says, I'm holding the line, when you cut support, that means everybody here has to do more work. Instead of having one professional development, when I first came into Vermont education, we had graduate level literacy instruction courses at our school sites supported by the AOE. That doesn't happen. That hasn't happened in years. And part of it is when we're not doing something at the state level, it's a false economy. Instead of doing it once for everybody, now we have to do it 52 times over. And that means every district has to hire someone, or every school has to hire someone to do that work. So that is a cost shift onto the property tax.
Thank you. Next. Oh, yeah.
Gee, it doesn't necessarily translate to savings at the AOE level, because something I've observed is that AOE may have fewer staff, but they have fewer staff, so then they contract out. So they may actually end up spending more money. They have fewer bodies, but they end up contracting out. So they may actually end up spending more money. Is that accurate?
And they may, yes. And one of the things we found during our discussion of the funding program, you may find that one of the board people mentions this, is that they had some, when they hire out-of-state contractors, they're not all equal. And I'm just gonna politely say that they didn't understand Vermont. There were some pretty serious fundamental errors in some of that contracting.
It's just important that you look at that and you think, oh, there's huge savings at AOE, putting aside the issues you're talking about, Rebecca, but it's increased capacity and potentially increased cost at AOE.
Sure, and there just isn't the professional development support. So if there's a literacy initiative, for example, that the state is pushing, that it's on us to provide our own professional development, or to hire people to come in and do it for us, instead of having an agency of education that's properly staffed that can provide that kind of support. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned that support service staff, there's been more support service burden placed back on the districts as well, because the state's not carrying that for us. And this just gives, this is a graph that shows what other states are doing in terms of their expenditures for support services, and you can see that we're leading the league. And we'll get into sort of alternatives to this sort of outlay when we start talking about cooperative educational service areas. But we're carrying these burdens on an increasing basis at the local level for support services. And it's, the graph starts at 25%, so it may look a little more dramatic, but you can see clearly we're going up every year and we're the highest. Next, please.
Can we do this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this one's a little complicated. This is a timeline of the implementation of Act 73. I do not expect you to read every line. What I'm trying to show you is how many things are supposed to be accomplished in a very, very short time window. They're all being done at the same time by the same people. That's the big takeaway from this slide. This is not a small change that we're asking of our school districts and our systems. And it's everything from rethinking, doing a bunch of reports, thinking how we do things, rethinking how we do pre-kindergarten, rethinking how we do CTE, which is career and tech education, whole bunch of new rules about class sizes, which are supposed to be in effect next year. I don't know if you received guidance on that, but there's no guidance, but they're in effect. So there's a lot going on here. Linda, the next one. For the purpose of tonight, this is what we're focusing on. Really two issues that are hitting your districts hard and fast. One is that as written, the new district boundaries are supposed to be approved and decided on by July 1. That's not very far from now. So sometime between now and July 1, the thought is that the legislature will approve a new set of maps that reorganize the state into new districts. Then a year later, you will have, or not even a year, half a year later, you'll have school board elections for new, bigger districts, and the new districts are supposed to be operational 2 years after they've been set up by the legislature. So these are not voluntary mergers. This is not Thetford saying, I want to merge with Norwich. This is, and you'll see the maps in a second, these are big new districts that are being contemplated, and this is all supposed to happen in 2 years. We didn't have a lot of merging around in our area, but I did have, there are a lot of districts in the legislature, and I was just asking every school board member there, how's your merger going from Act 6? And they said, we're 5 years in and we're still working on it. So this is a very, very accelerated timeline. People need to understand that. It's also going to coincide with a new foundation formula, and both of our chairs will speak to that, or our board members will speak to that. But in the new district, it won't be your board making those decisions about how to allocate that new funding in that new system. It will be another board in that bigger district that's being contemplated. And there will be no school budget votes unless your larger district, not your current local district, unless your larger district decides to spend more. And there is a significant financial penalty for spending more. So that's a very big change. The state is saying, we are going to decide how much you get to spend and how much you get to spend at each level for kids. And that's a very, very big cultural change for Vermont. Next slide.
And that's all mandatory, Rebecca?
Yes, that's the thought. It's all mandatory. So and we're going to go through quickly, but you can, just to give you a sense, these are the two maps that Secretary Saunders chose to present this week in House Education. I just picked two because they were available. Please don't think this is going to happen, but think that this is what she's talking about. And just to be clear, we are currently... This is our area right here. So you can see we're right sitting in the middle of a larger, in this case, a larger regional high school map. It's a little unclear, but you can see that in this larger regional area, we're looking in the Upper Valley White River. They're looking at a district of maybe 8,700 kids that runs, I forget what these towns are, but all the way down to, I think, Springfield, and then high up north. So you can see it's a pretty big district. Go to the next one. This is another map that she presented that is what she calls a hybrid, that is mixing her vision for comprehensive districts organized around regional high schools plus some adjustment. And this has us now in a Windsor district. Now we're down to 8,000 students. But again, you can see just the sheer distance, but also think about the communities and the variety and the transitioning. And also look at what it's done. I mean, when you think about historic relationships, when you think about who sends their kids to TA, who sends their kids to Hanover, this is interrupting some of those historic relations. And it also has implications, and I know that our board members are going to speak to that because it raises a lot of questions about what happens in these new constructs. Next. So I'm going to turn this back. Neil, would you like to go first and talk about the kinds of questions that are coming up for you?
Yeah, I can. I mean, honestly, what we're looking at here is just this just leads to a bunch of more questions. So, what would a governance change look like for our two towns in Norwich? As many of you are aware, right? We're part of an interstate school district. So our local kids, our K-6 kids, our pre-K-6 kids all go to school at Marion Cross here in Norwich. That's a standalone Norwich district. It's the 7 through 12 Dresden district, which is the interstate district. So we've got we're really talking about two separate districts, a standalone Norwich district and then a 7 through 12 interstate district. So what would this change look like? I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to tell you what might happen. A lot of unanswered things here, and I think some of that we can talk about a little bit later this evening. But there are a lot of questions that come up. Who's going to decide on staffing and operations at Marion Cross? In theory, right, the Norwich is a K-6 Vermont district. We're on the table for possible consolidation.
Closure
Right.
of Marion Cross?
We're on the table for consolidation. We're not going to call it closure at this point. We're going to call it consolidation. But because we are a feeder system into an interstate school district that was established under federal law, there's a lot of uncertainty. The two maps that you just saw prior to this were two maps that were presented just this past week. At the beginning or toward the end of the last legislative session, the maps typically had both Dresden and Rivendell, the two interstate districts, carved out. So I don't know if it was intentional with the maps that have presented this week to no longer have a carve out for the interstate districts, but that's what was presented in the legislature. The other thing that is really curious about this, and it speaks a little bit to the cost item, is when you if you're looking at that level of consolidation across the state with school districts, the likelihood is that when those merged districts come together, you're going to have a whole bunch of different teacher contracts that need to be consolidated at that point. I am pretty certain that no teacher bargaining unit is going to say, please give me the lowest contract out of all of the ones that we've just combined. And so the reality is that we're probably going to be looking at a level up of the spending as all of those teacher contracts get merged into one at the highest pay rate from all of those merged districts. And in that case, your spending is going to increase. As we had mentioned before, most school budgets are somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80% salaries and benefits, right? And so when you start talking about merging districts together and then leveling up those contracts, it's going to lead to increased cost. You want to take the Thetford piece of it?
You want to talk about Thetford?
Now, I'm Nick, no. I'm pretending to be Nick. So I'm going to actually read what Nick and you all wrote in here. Will we still be able to designate Thetford Academy as our high school? It's a key question for us. Turns out Thetford Academy was created in, I think, 1819, and was the first secondary school in the state of Vermont.
It's the oldest. It wasn't the first. It survived all the others.
It survived all these. Okay, thank you very much. It's the oldest, and it was always coeducational. Girls, boys, yeah, from its very, very beginning. And I heard many, many years ago that it remains a public-private school because its foundational documents go back so far that the legal expense of redesigning everything would be just crazy. Let's not spend money on that. Let's focus on educating kids. So we very, very much want to keep our Thetford Academy, figure out how best to do this. And we want our kids to be able to go to elementary school in the town school. If we end up merging with other towns, are we going to find that our elementary school gets erased? Well, at the same time you do that, you're also increasing the cost and the time spent transporting kids to school, no matter where it happens. And as a person who taught at Oxbow High School in Bradford for almost 30 years, I had kids from Topsom that were going to Oxbow High School. And so you're at the end of the bus line. You end up spending an hour and a half to get to school in the morning and another hour and a half to go back home again. So when I'm looking at these big districts, saying you're many ways in which you're actually going to make education cost more and also not work as well for kids. Let me see. And who is making all these decisions? Can we have any input? And that is another thing that I've hugely valued about living here and teaching here, not in New Jersey and not in Massachusetts and not in Michigan, because here community shows up. When you have a town school town meeting, a school meeting, people all show up. Well, of course I show up because I'm paying the bill. And of course I'm coming to the ball game because it's my next door neighbor who's playing in the game. And I want to make sure that this kid has a good education. So I highly value that local engagement, which in that big dividing things up into a smaller number of school districts, I don't think you're going to save any money, and I don't think you're going to improve the quality of education, because when you're in an area that big and you're a superintendent, you really don't know who it is that you're working with. You don't know what the issues are the kids and families in those small towns that are so far away are facing. And so I also think that maintaining quality with that number there, that amount of money, is also missing the point, because we are providing a lot of social services through our educational system. And it's not just what's happened at the state level, but it's also what's happened at the federal level, which has taken away those supports and is driving up the cost that we have to end up paying, because fewer kids, for example, qualify for free lunch or reduced lunch, as an example. So we still need to feed them, and now we have to pay more. I don't know. Have I said enough? Pretending to be Nick?
I think you did an amazing job being Mary.
Being Mary. Okay, I'm Mary now.
Yeah. Next, Linda. So just highlight, I'll just say this really quickly so you can hear directly from the boards. Under this new foundation fund, we did get a spreadsheet in the legislature that explained how the savings were going to come. And the savings are not coming from mergers. Everyone accepts that now. There's no expectation that all that merging is going to reduce cost. The way it's coming, as proposed, as it was shared with us, is they're going to cap growth in total spending in education by NEPA with the new inflator, which is about 2% a year. You cannot grow your spending more overall 2% a year. If you think about baseline, projections of inflation, they're exceeding that right now, and they're certainly exceeding it. I mean, we are seeing now transportation. We now have 4 companies. They're all private equity companies. So if you're depending on those bus companies right now, you're seeing growth in spending. Sometimes 26% this year is the average. We're seeing the healthcare expenditures. We're seeing that cost pressure everywhere, but we're going to cut you off and you're just not going to be able to grow. So it is a process of forced cuts. That's what's happening. There are some towns that will get more money. There are some towns that are going to get less. These 2 particular towns speaking today are looking at getting a lot less. And that's what the numbers are about to show. So the next slide. This is Thetford. Nick, you're on again.
Gee.
You are so game.
Well,
Thank you.
This is a number I haven't seen. Let me see here.
I can help you.
Okay, so Thetford had a LTW.
How about I help you with this one?
Help me with that
'cause
one.
I was here when Nick gave this to me. Yep.
Previous slide too.
Yep.
This is probably a really dumb question.
First of all, there's no dumb question at all. And by the way, I do want to call it that Jim Maslin has come in. He's my partner in crime in the legislature, very actively engaged in all these conversations. So thank you. Go ahead.
So if they aren't expecting savings to come from the consolidation, what's the stated purpose of still forcing that?
Very good question.
Can I give my theory on that?
You can give a theory.
Good question.
So my theory is that in order for them to impose this foundation formula, it'll be a lot easier to impose it on a small number of uniform districts than it is to impose it on 119 widely varying districts throughout the state with different governance models. So it just helps them to implement this formula. And it boggles my mind, having visited all these different regions in the state through this process, that the amount of disruption to the system this is going to cause to simplify the imposition of a formula that may very well not work well, to me is just, it's really scary policy making in this short of a period of time.
And it's not that there's nothing inherently wrong with foundation formulas, but there is no state that has imposed a foundation plan to cut spending. And that's a big difference for us. And there is also, I've been looking, I have not found a single state that has imposed a formula like this and imposed mergers in the absence of construction aid, which we haven't had since the early 2000s. So there's some things that aren't sort of aligned with this particular proposal. You had a hand up. Yeah.
When you ask I'm sure you've asked this question, when they say to you, we're going to say no more than 2% a year, and you just said you're dealing with 4 vendors total for transportation. You're dealing with healthcare providers that have a small group have a complete monopoly of, they can raise rates 15, 16%. How in the world can you possibly say you're going to do it for 2%? I mean, I just don't see how that's even, how can you even say that with a straight face?
What they're saying is well, I'll let, Jim, why don't you
So
answer
let me just answer that briefly. Of the 2% of your school district budgets, working with Rebecca and others in the legislature, the fixed costs, things that are beyond the school district's board's control, are about half of that, or a large percentage of it. So when the pro tem says 2%, effectively for school boards it's 1%, and that's not going to work. And we know that. That's just. Let me add one other thing, as long as we're adding our many complaints here. My biggest concern about Act 73, the way it's proposed to roll out, is governance. As Jay said, if there are going to be new districts with new boards of barely newly elected people who don't know each other, how on earth are they going to work together to make decisions? And governance is going to fall apart right from the get-go. I mean, we could spend a whole evening talking about that. There's any number of things that we could talk. Neil's point on leveling up is absolutely right. I mean, there's a number of things about consolidation when we get down to the nitty-gritty details about contracts and stuff that are absolutely true. So I might shut up for now a moment just to say Act 73 provides a series of off-ramps that are built into the legislation that basically will lead us to the conclusion that Act 73 won't be implemented the way it was proposed. It just can't work that way. So essentially, we're starting over again, and we're partway through the last year of the biennium. And so my opinion is we're better off having something in statute that we react against specifically and begin to fix things one at a time, or try to, then start with something whole new between now and May 30th or something like that. But it's all a mishmash.
So, but I think that point, there are off-ramps, and there are also conversations. We heard the governor say, if there's no mergers, there's no budget. We are also hearing conversation, well, let's just do the foundation plan, but not the mergers. There's some volatility issues with that, but this is what those numbers would look like. And I think, Mary, I can say this, but your long-term weighted ADM is how many students you have adjusting and giving extra credit for kids who are living in poverty or economically disadvantaged, or kids who are learning English. And that was the number that Thetford was given. And they had spending of just over 18 million with 18,000 per student, with a total spending of just over 10 and a half, or about 10.5 million in Thetford. You would compare that if that foundation plan as specified, and these numbers are being restudied as we speak, but if that foundation plan as referenced in the bill passed, the funding that would be returned to Thetford would be about 8.5 million. That's about 18% less than the district is currently spending. And so then the question is, what would that do? Like, how would the district and how would TA adjust to that? That's the question. That's what. And then, yep.
How do you take the offer?
Jay's going to talk about that. We're getting there. Let's keep going, because I want to make sure we get to that question, and we are going to have an ask of you at the end. So keep going. Yeah. This is phased in over time. I think what the thing to take away from this slide is you wouldn't get that full hit in the first year. Everything is phased in over years, so that you wouldn't have the full hit of that reduction. And again, these aren't inflation adjusted, and the numbers will be updated at some point. But the point is, it's a pretty significant cut, and it would be phased in and growing over time. So don't focus on the number, focus on you will not see these numbers ever again, but focus on the trend, the basic implication. And next, and this is Norwich. Neil, do you want to?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, if we thought Thetford was bad, Norwich is a little bit worse. We're looking at, and to be clear, like, Norwich does have we spend a lot of money per student, right? So let's just be honest about that here in Norwich. So at $20,676 per long-term weighted ADM student, we're about the highest in the state with that number, right? All of that gives us education spending of just shy of $17 million. And it's spread pretty much 50-50 between what we spend at Marion Cross and then how much we send to Dresden across the river, right? Under a foundation formula with that same number of $15,033 per long-term weighted ADM student, we're looking at a total reduction of over $4.5 million to the district. $4 million, give or take, is about the entire budget at Marion Cross just for regular education instruction. So if we got rid of all of our teachers, all of the specials, all of the EAs, we could come in and we would still be able to operate a school. If you go to the next slide really quick, this is a little confusing. I realize as I put the numbers together, what you would take away from this for Norwich. So if we needed to, they provide a phase-in period for this so that it doesn't all see the disappearance of over $4 million in 1 year. So they phase it in over a period of 4 or 5 years. We would need to make about $1 million in cuts, obviously, every year for 4 or 5 years in order for us to get down to that new base amount. I'll leave it at that.
And this would be, in other districts, you would see the opposite trend. You would see some districts spending more. And, I am a firm believer that every kid deserves the best education that we can provide them as a state, and every child is a Vermont child. I think the thing that gives me pause, when you think about Thetford Academy, when you think about the Dresden, when you think about TES and Norwich, the Marion Cross School, they're actually meeting, the school size and the class size expectations that were supposed to be what made us affordable. So you've got bigger districts with bigger class sizes, and we're still just way off on the numbers. So it's not clear where the flex is. And you were going to say something, yeah?
Yeah, I was going to just say that having from my previous superintendency in Erie, Pennsylvania, I had to cut $26 million from roughly $185 million budget. You don't cut $900,000 out of the Marion Cross budget without reducing a significant number of staff. Like we've said, anywhere from 60 to 80% of your budget is staff, salaries and benefits. If you could imagine, I can't even wrap my mind around how you'd operate an elementary school imagine taking 9 teachers out, or taking an assistant. We'd always go administration first, so take an assistant principal out and then take 8 teachers out or 7 teachers. Those of you who've worked at Marion Cross or who are very familiar with Marion Cross, we typically have maybe in the lower grades 2 teachers, maybe on a really big year in kindergarten there might be 3 or 4 sections. You're talking about massive increases in class size, and if I had to summarize Act 73, I would say what this bill is going to do is it's going to increase class sizes, it's going to close schools, and it's going to take away local control. Period. That's what the governor's running on. That's what his original proposal was, and to do that in this compressed time frame where we're going to start July with establishing these new big districts is malpractice. I can't think of a better word for it. We took 3 years, before we touched a school to close the school in Erie, we did a thorough study. We did 3 years of preparation with our community to show them that we had too much unused capacity in our buildings. The state hasn't done that work. They did a facility condition assessment. They gave us that data and they said we have, I don't know how many $1 billion worth of unmet needs. That thing is so off, it's so low, that with our version of that facility condition assessment, we had it redone by a local architect and found that it's nowhere near the actual numbers. The numbers they're using to say that we have, in terms of building needs, are so understated. I don't know what they're going to do. And I'm sorry, but I'm starting to get revved up.
So we want to get to the good news. We have a couple more slides. I want to get through them so people have a chance to talk. So let's keep moving. And I think we kind of covered this. I'll just let you observe this. People are very worried. And I'm hearing that not just from the two boards represented, I'm hearing that from Sharon and Strafford as well. People are really worried about what this means. I'm actually hearing from a lot of districts, not even our own. So people are very worried about where this is going to go. Next. Do you want to take these, Jay? This is public input to the task force.
Yeah, so we went to 4 different locations, actually we had six meetings total. We had
public meetings.
And I'll be honest, I testified before a joint session last February, right after the governor had made his proposal of going to 5 districts. And I was asked a question about, well, do you think you could have districts that were bigger, that were 8,000? And I had come from a place where I had 13,000 students, so yeah, you can. But it's different when all those 13,000 kids are in one area that's not much bigger than the town of Norwich.
Right.
And so what I learned on that tour was that there are distinct differences between regions in our state. And and it's everything from geography to local government to the economic condition of the area. At each of these sessions, we asked people to let us know what their priorities were. And these came from the guiding criteria we were handed as a task force. And their priorities, they wanted to improve quality. Now this is really our charge as a committee was to reduce costs, improve quality, and ensure equity. Those were 3 of the principal guidelines we were given. So do more with less and make sure it improves equity statewide. So equitable opportunities came in second. Increased cost effectiveness, still a concern, obviously, in rating number 3. Economies of scale got less support. A more coherent and consistent system didn't seem to be as important to people. And then more efficient governance rated low. And I'm not sure how to interpret that. I think the way I choose to interpret it is that people are okay with governance as they have it right now. So that wasn't a priority for them.
And I think the next slide is, remember this distribution? Now look at this slide.
Yeah, this was, we asked the public. We were being very vulnerable and asking the public how confident they were in us that we would be able to do all this with redistricting. And you can see for yourselves that people aren't very confident that Act 73 is going to do any of these things.
Wow.
And this was input from, we had over 5,000 people provide input. So this was,
these are like teachers and
it was
superintendents.
community members,
Everybody.
it was
Yeah.
everybody, yeah. Rep. Maslin.
Thank you, Rep. Holcombe. Just to add some to the misery, but as briefly, we had the deputy secretary in our committee just this week. It fits very apropos of what you were just saying, Jay. And the unmistakable message that was repeated several times in different words was that local boards make bad decisions. I mean, it was very clear. We all heard it. Different words, but that's what she was saying. So it's part and parcel of that sentiment is what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Apparently, I owe all of you an apology.
You're not corporate enough.
Jim, I would have, if I had to say, just my impression, having done this since August and dealt with the fallout from a lot of the decisions we made, is that I get the very strong sense that our Secretary of Ed, who has never taught in a public school, who has never led a public school, let alone a district, whose only public school experience was in a giant district. I can't remember how many people are in the county district in Florida where she worked briefly. This is what she wants, and this is what the governor is telling us he wants.
You're right on point, sir.
So that, I will say I kind of called her out on it because at the first meeting she did a sort of introductory presentation to us and told us that we didn't need to worry about implementation.
That's a quote.
Yeah,
That is a quote,
I can
actually.
still get myself like screaming mad over that. Like,
Okay. Jay, I'm gonna let you talk about something good.
no, there's not. I can't say that. There's almost nothing I can say good about this whole plan, except that it might work, but it's not going to work if it's rushed. And there's so many unanswered questions that I hope you have, and if you don't, I've got a few to offer you. That to disrupt a system, like, you know, systems just kind of grow over time. And here in Vermont, over centuries, we talk about 1819 for the start of Thetford Academy. Education is really, really important to us as Vermonters. And it always has been. It's in our Constitution as our primary duty. And to just like, just disrespectfully just wipe it out without a plan, to me, is just, I can't think of a polite word to use to describe it, but it's really bad.
So tell us what, I'm gonna keep moving us because, I would love to have you speak.
Yeah, hi. I just want to speak to Jay's point. My name is Carrie Brown and I'm the head of school at Thetford Academy. I think probably in this room, most of us are residents of Thetford or Norwich. And my understanding is, as Act 46 unfolded, 2016, 2017, 2018, our towns were basically absolved from, after all, doing all the due diligence, is my understanding. I wasn't here in the state at the time. So Act 46 might be a little bit abstract to us, and we think about Act 73 as being maybe disruptive. Disruption sometimes can be good for systems, but I think what Jay is saying is that this is actually an absolute rupture. 73 to the point of potential implosion. And I just want to speak to, and I think even Strafford and Sharon, the other two towns in your district, also were kind of absolved from any major changes, right, with Act 46?
Act 46 was just a very different bill.
Yeah.
The state could not merge districts
Right.
to different structures.
Yeah.
So yes, they didn't.
But what I want to share, I guess, with this gathered group that maybe personally didn't feel the impact, was what I'm saying, of Act 46, or at least went through the experience of like doing the exploration and everything, but didn't actually have to make major changes in their systems, right? So I just want to share a couple of other towns, maybe on the edges, if you think of it that way, of the Upper Valley. For us, they're very central to our world at Thetford Academy, which are Chelsea and Tunbridge, Vermont. So those are two towns which had historically their own districts forever and ever and ever, that through Act 46 merged. And just watching over time, my 7 years in locally, them working through that merger. And working with individual kids, for example, whose siblings went to Chelsea High School and they couldn't graduate from Chelsea High School because Chelsea High School closed in 2018 as part of Act 46. Just one example, an incredibly huge disruption. Many would probably call it a rupture to that community. Tunbridge and Chelsea, maybe from here we think, oh, they're right next to each other. That's easy, they merge. Very different towns. Very different sending patterns. One had Choice Forever, one had its own high school. They had to come together. They then, over the course of many years, worked together to figure out, okay, we're gonna have the K4, I think it is. We're gonna have the 5-8, two different towns. Their little kids had to go across the hill, across the mountain to the other town, vice versa. Just watching that unfold from our vantage point at Thetford Academy, it's taken years, and they're still figuring that out. And the idea that we would now come in with Act 73 and completely throw everything up again for these communities that had that impact of Act 46 is just huge. So I just wanted to share that experience because I think it seems to me that Norwich, Thetford, maybe Sharon and Strafford, Act 46 was sort of like an abstract exercise in thinking about mergers. But I'm dealing on a daily basis with kids and families and communities that actually have had to live through it and are still figuring it out. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
It's actually a fantastic segue. I do want Jay to tell you why he was called a failure. which is what's up there. And I also want to make sure everyone understands these are not school district mergers on this map. But Linda, you had a question?
Yes, what I would simply like to say, so you've outlined the proposals that relate to consolidation, and you've also outlined that it's clear, and it sounds as if there's agreement from all parties that consolidation does not save money. Is that true, that the Scott administration would say they would acknowledge that consolidation does not save money? But on the other hand, there's also the foundation formula, and that is meant to be like a knife going across the budgets, right? And so is the basic education policy from the administration is simply cut spending, not get after the reasons that school spending has grown so much, but just to say, hey, so those things are potentially going to stay exactly the same, and then we're just saying, but you can't spend what you need for, I would say, quality education. So is that
That's pretty accurate.
Reasonable summary?
That's a reasonable, and Jay introduced the drivers of cost, and when we asked the agency for data that would support that, we actually had to go to people outside the agency for some of it. Our point was, we need to know if mergers are even going to affect any of these things, and we could find no evidence. And we also did a very exhaustive literature review and could find no research supporting that what was being proposed would actually do that. And in some cases, there was evidence that it could actually increase costs quite significantly, which is why Jay failed. I'm kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke.
I consider myself a proud failure.
But please, but I do have to say one thing. I want the people in Thetford to know that when this was presented, this map said right up in a headline, these areas on the map will be readjusted at district request. So please don't look at the fact, this is a vestige of the fact that Rivendell merged north of you and it created a weird thing. So please don't look at yourself here and think that your superintendent has already told us that they're going to request reassignment, which is fine around historical reasons. So take it away, Jay. Sure. What is this? Why did this end up being the recommendation?
So, well, the secretary pointed out to us that this wasn't our concern, that we shouldn't care about implementation. I'll confess that when I testified at that joint session a year ago, I felt like that I'd done some just back of the napkin calculations about what if we went to county districts and only had 14 districts in Vermont, like we'd have reasonable size except for Chittenden County, and you could save a lot of administrative overhead. I guess in terms of, like maybe made a kind of a gallows humor at a superintendent's meeting saying we'll need a much smaller place to meet if we do this consolidation. And I reacted, I took as a challenge some testimony that was given to us by the Rural Alliance, who cited a study from Arkansas that showed that merger didn't save money or was neutral. And so I wanted to verify that, and so I started doing my own literature review, and yeah, Arkansas was one study, but the more and more we dug into this, the more inconclusive the research was, and there have been mergers going on in our own state for 100 years or more. And there's just not research support for that fact. And the fact that the governor now is saying that there isn't savings from these mergers, I think this is a new confession on his part then. They're relatively new.
They want to do it.
Because all along we need to consolidate because of the cost. Like the reason for doing this was public education spending's out of control. So we need to merge. And we disproved that. And so they don't save money, they are a lot of work. It might make a lot of sense. But the homework hasn't been done to determine that yet. And we learned in traveling around the different regions of the state that the intelligence and combined wisdom of the communities that are served by our schools probably are a better guide for what would work best to merge or consolidate than to have somebody sitting in Montpelier just draw up a map, or have a task force draw up a map. So it wasn't that we were accused by the governor of just being political ideologues. or something like that, and that we just had an ideological axe to grind, and that's why we made this recommendation. That's not the case. What we learned, well, didn't learn, we knew that in southeast Vermont, and the superintendent in Dresden is part of the southeast superintendent group. They started down the road of trying to find a way to share resources, especially for things that were sort of low incidence but high cost, things like some special education, some sort of like specialized special education services, mental health services, that sort of thing. And they started to pool their resources, and they actually contracted with a group out of Massachusetts that supports what are called cooperative educational service agencies. And they've been already seeing savings by not doing this work alone. And so, I came here from Pennsylvania, where the state has a very long established system of cooperative education service areas, which is called the intermediate unit system, and they do so much, and they create economies of scale for smaller districts that maybe can't afford to have an autistic support classroom. I hosted one in a little district I worked in Pennsylvania, and I only had 1 or 2 students attending, but my neighbors in the other districts sent their students, and we all chipped in to pay for the teacher who was an employee of the cooperative education agency. And they work, and when we looked at all the states that the secretary had compared us with, all of them except for us have these sorts of, New York, it's called BOCES, Pennsylvania, they're intermediate units, other places, they're one or the other of those. And we thought, like, why don't we just expand on that work? The legislature's already enabled these partnerships. Why don't we do it and do it like meaningfully and intentionally and set these things up and see if we can't save some money by working together? And we found in the research that the savings, it's not huge, but it could be anywhere from 10 to 40%, depending on what it is that you're sharing. I'll give one really like minute, detailed sort of thing. We would bill for Medicaid, for those families that were eligible if we were providing services that were deemed eligible for that reimbursement. And in my big district that I worked for, we had our own staff member who did that work. There is a person in the SAU office here in this district who does that billing for us and does all that administrative work. But in really small districts, they still have to do it. So that's a service that could be shared, that one person working in a CESA, a cooperative education service area, could do that for a bunch of districts and remove that expense or decrease that expense for those smaller districts. Same thing for lower incidence special education, mental health support. There are a lot of different things, and even like office work. Instead of staffing a whole central office, there are certain roles that can be done in a more regionalized manner. The other part of this was we thought, so implement that. Gotcha. And the other thing was we talked, as we were doing our work, we had people come up to us and say, hey, we're already talking to this district about maybe getting together and merging. We actually were invited to White River Valley SU to attend a meeting just to talk about the task force. But what was really interesting is while we were there, Orange Southwest had a board meeting within a board meeting. They brought their whole board. They called themselves to order in the audience at the White River Valley SU board meeting. And it was like I was sitting in between them, and I felt like I was at a speed dating. They came because Act 73 is like the sword of Damocles hanging over everybody. And they came to the White River board and said, we came here wondering if maybe you guys want to get together. And it was really, really interesting to hear like the people on the White River Valley board sort of listened to this. It wasn't an outright request, but the suggestion, and it was interesting where it died, because it died when the White River Valley Board said, well, we have choice. We have like 120 kids who are using choice. Do you have choice? And they looked at each other and said, we don't have choice. Which raised another, this is not on our agenda this evening, but that's another whole thing for us to work through, is like, how's that going to play out? But I just thought it was really interesting that people were starting to come together and try to find ways to merge using their own local knowledge. Same thing in Windsor. We had 3 districts in Windsor County who had already started to work together and came to us to talk about whether or not they'd have any say in it. The people talking up in the Northeast Kingdom, if Act 73 has done nothing else, it's actually created a bit of pressure for districts to start to think, how could we work together or potentially merge? And if we took our time, and we thought that if we provided incentives like construction aid for our buildings that are all in dire need, what if we conditioned substantial aid on finding ways to be more efficient in our governance structures, and come up with a plan where you phase it in over time? But that's not going to get us there by July of 2026. It's going to take, we thought, like, to do this right, you got to have a 10-year vision, not a 1-year vision.
And I mean, if you're as geeky as us, if you Google online the Vermont Redistricting Task Force, it will take you to the Agency of Administration website where that full report is located. You can read the short version, the shorty, which is 30 pages, and you can, Appendix E is the 170-page version, and it actually goes through some of these little examples of just,
sure.
And there are places where it makes sense to merge. They actually aren't always the places people think, which was kind of interesting. So there's some good conversation. I'm really worried about time because I know people are going to walk out.
I have one more,
okay.
And I'll talk about tuitioning. Tuitioning is something that we also found was very different from region to region. In our region, we have schools that are operating in this sort of hybrid environment where they're independent schools that are educating kids either because they're designated or because their town has choice. And I'm pleased to say, like, those that are operating in our district they're hiring certified teachers. They are following the quality standards. They're held to the same. They're holding themselves to the same requirements largely that public schools are required to. But we were at one meeting in which a parent got up and talked to us about how if we were to take away choice from them, that they'd have to move. They moved here during COVID. They had a student who was going to the Stratton Mountain School, which is a ski school. She went through the bell schedule. She said, it's really hard. My child has to be there by 8 o'clock. They ski constantly until noon. They take a break, and then they go back out and ski some more. And then they do some classwork in the afternoon, and then they do more physical training afterwards. And that school charges parents
total 36 above the tuition.
Yeah, over $50,000 to attend that school, and the people in that area are paying 20-some thousand toward that. So, and meanwhile, Leland and Gray is really dying on the vine. And Twin Valley, same thing. We talked to people at Twin Valley who are bleeding over the Massachusetts border. And losing students to the point where they're having to offer their own welding programs and design some kind of homegrown career and tech offerings to keep their kids from leaving and going to Massachusetts. So that to not be able to have a conversation about the impact financially of our tuitioning systems from district to district and region to region is not doing a thorough job of the upfront analysis before we do this massive transformation. And I'll leave it at that.
I think we've covered this, keep going. Yep. This is where this is what we heard from the governor, and we're waiting to see how this plays out in the session. And
we didn't fail too badly, because now the secretary is using our high school model in her presentations.
Yeah, and today, the testimony from the secretary was about an educational service area. Like, they even go after the language, but they said that there would be one ESA, but that it would have directors regionally. So it's basically your CSIP program.
But just for career tech.
But just for career tech,
Yeah.
So I was surprised by that today. I wondered if you had reflection on that.
Well, we
Like,
did.
Are they merging? Are they going towards your plan, or?
It's very unclear where we're going to land. So, but good observation. We were relieved that now CISA's, originally they were just more bureaucracy, but now they're actually using them. So there is this shift taking place.
Did you want to say something? And then I really want to make sure.
Just a couple of little
people came
things
out of time.
briefly with regards to consolidation. There's a principle that we talk about frequently in Ways and Means, which is expand the base and reduce the rate. And that's a concept. Expand the area or the number of things that you tax, and you're able to tax people less. And in a broad sense, consolidation is supposed to lead to that. But as Kerry Brennan said, with regards to governance, there's no plan. And the administration, the agency doesn't want there to be a plan. They want to be the plan. They want to impose the result, and it's easy to see as you listen to what they say. So we can talk all evening, but I've probably said enough for the moment. Thank you.
Right. Well, and I appreciate the focus on the relationships.
And I'd also say,
That
well,
was
I still Rebecca's done some remarkable work on BOCES by whatever set of initials we want to use. So we had a good presentation today on the Ways and Means website. There's and on your task force website, there's ample information for people to spend a lot of time on and say, oh, geez, I think this will work. As Jay is saying, let's try it out.
It's not a new concept. I mean, they've been doing it in New York for 75 years at least.
Absolutely.
Right, they do it in 45 other states, I think. Somebody's saying. I just want to, the purpose of right now, and if you have to get up and go, that's fine. But the purpose of now is really to have a conversation. And these are some prompts, but I think we really want to hear from you, ask people questions, share what you're concerned about, respond to some of the things that have been said. But go ahead.
So how do we put a break on this?
What can we do?
I mean, besides not voting for Scott. But that seems like it's coming too late. So, I mean, do we keep calling you guys to say, put a break on it? I mean, how can the public steer this ship the right way? I'm not from thinking, because I haven't heard anyone say anything about how this is gonna affect our kids. Like, from the administration, how this is gonna improve the education of the children. And I'm gasping.
Yes. Do you want me to jump in? Okay.
I would tell people locally, anytime, if you really want to have your say and impact the discussion, you've got to step up, and you have to go to a board meeting. In the case of a school district, we would make decisions. We might have 5 people show up on an issue, and all of a sudden it changes the vote of the school board. I think the legislature obviously is a much larger entity, but I think there are questions that we need to be asking. I think if you write op-ed pieces and letters to the editor, I think that has an impact. If you you're preaching to the choir if you're contacting Rebecca.
Right.
And Jim.
But I think you need to be contacting some of the leadership in the legislature. I think the governor's office needs to be getting a flood of messages. And when they start hearing public opinion, I said in some interview, I feel like we did the governor a favor if he listens to our recommendation, because what we heard from, I don't care what political affiliation you have, every meeting we went to, I think there were people probably from every party, nobody liked it.
Yeah.
We didn't have anybody show up and say, oh, what a great idea. We think this is going to be wonderful. And there was lots of people. We would have, this would be a small gathering. There were 100 people would show up.
Yeah.
So be heard, like write letters or get a group of people to write a letter. Do a petition. Like I would say anything you can get to make them understand there's a groundswell of opposition to this would be super helpful.
And may I ask a follow-up? So you're highlighting that the governor needs to hear from this, and may I ask, because I was disappointed that the Senate Pro Tem, leader of the Senate, and the Speaker, leader of the House, at least perhaps a month ago or so, they seem to be supporting Governor Scott's position on this, which I was very surprised at. So do they also need to?
They also need to hear it too.
Okay.
You should write to the leadership in the House and the Senate. And that's all available. I can make it available to Linda, but it's also all available on the General Assembly website as well. And I'd be happy to, if people want to contact Linda. The voice does make a difference. And you know, you can also reach out to your school leaders. I know, Carrie, I've gotten great letters from you, and that we've been able to, you know, push on some of the issues around the size of the funding and where the discrepancies might be and what might be driving them. So use your local leaders. Don't, you know, especially if you've got granular information that's really important, but you have to be writing not just Governor Scott, you have to be writing the leadership in the legislature as well.
And the committees, both.
And the
Senate
committee chairs,
and
yep,
House
yep.
Education committees.
And I can send that to Linda as well. Yeah.
I have another broader question to ask, which is, all of this stuff arose because our leadership at various levels is all very worried about property taxes.
Yes.
So we haven't really talked much about property taxes, but the thing that I find worrisome about the policy discussion so far is it isn't really targeted at getting after the underlying causes for education costs and therefore property tax increases. It's just saying, let's just slash the spending, which does not seem like a good solution to me.
Right.
So what is the discussion in the context? Mostly, we've not been talking about property taxes. We've been talking about the impact on the quality of education and stuff. So what do you hear about all these solutions?
Well, I think one of the first ones I would say is the governor is in charge of healthcare reform. That is his role in statute. What has he done on it? Right? Actually, he did one thing. This year, guess what he proposed as his healthcare reform strategy? Regional shared services. So somehow it's not okay for education, but it's regional shared services. His proposal for leading on healthcare reform, which is his job, is regional shared services for healthcare, but it's not okay for schools. So there's some real inconsistencies there. But he's been governor now for almost 10 years. He's in charge of healthcare reform. We now have the highest per person healthcare costs in the world because we're the highest in the nation. That means we're the highest in the world. So that we are not going to survive that, especially when we lose the subsidies on the exchange if he doesn't get going. So, you know, and we did do some great work. Actually, Neil had a great, do you want to give it your healthcare example, Vermont versus New Hampshire?
Well, I can give so quickly the introduction, the example. So just this year, so on this side of the river, because we're governed by a different health insurance provider, our rate of increase was 7.4%. Big, but actually was lower than it had been in the previous several years. On the other side of the river, the story was very different, and we are paying for a health insurance increase there of 25.6%.
What explains the difference is?
Well, what explains the difference is on this side of the river, our health insurance provider clamped down on the utilization of the GLP-1 drugs sooner than the healthcare provider did on the other side.
And that was because of a bill that came out of the legislature that was put forward by Democrats, right? That was an advance. People saw that coming, and we worked aggressively in the legislature to cap that pharmaceutical increase.
If I can just continue on the healthcare piece. So you're right. One of the things that has not really, I think, been fully discussed, at least in the last two sessions, are the cost drivers associated with education. Like, why are the property taxes going up so much? We spent a lot of time, when I say we, I meant the education community, a couple of sessions back of continually going in and providing testimony as to what those things were. and they seem to have been ignored. One of the things that we're talking about right now, and you saw on a slide earlier, was the health insurance increases, right? I will tell you tonight, right, there is absolutely a portion of that that is related to the systemic issues of healthcare that we have in our nation. There is another aspect of it, however, that is in very direct control of our legislators and our governor, and that are the parameters that were put around the process for bargaining healthcare at the state level when we switched this back in 2018. It used to be that local school districts negotiated premiums and cost share for those things individually in every district. In 2018, that was moved to the state level, but the law set certain parameters around the bargaining of that has been unfavorable to employers since it went into place. It's an arbitration system where at the very end, the arbitrator is required to pick one side's proposal or the other side's proposal. They cannot mix and match their arbitration award. And in the last 2 rounds of bargaining, the arbitrator selected the employees' last best offer, not the employers, not the school districts, but the employees. That alone has contributed to increased utilization of the healthcare plans, and it's driven the value of those plans up greater than we really would have liked to see, greater than what you're seeing in even the marketplace, right? And so all we're asking for is a change in the parameters for bargaining that benefit that to help bring a little bit of balance to the process and could actually control healthcare spending amongst teachers. That is something that you all can do today. You can reach out to your legislators and say, please support this change in the bargaining parameters for the healthcare.
So it's targeting, one is to say, hey, please focus on regional shared services or whatever it is that's actually going to tackle the drivers of cost. Another is to actually encourage the governor to step up and address some of the healthcare issues, whether it's through that solution or whether through some of the others. Those are the kinds of things that we're hoping people can help, because we can't keep going as we are right now. Yep.
Just for clarity, where is this process going forward? I kind of watched the legislators and committee, trying to get a better understanding of what the task force came up with. I actually heard you talk about this rush timeline for something that should be well thought out and take much longer time. I know that the Vermont Principals Association has talked about preserving certain aspects of where we are. How do you see this process going forward?
I think I'm hesitant to speak because I can't speak for the whole legislature. What I can tell you is the way these tend to unfold is the committees of jurisdiction, which means the education committees in both bodies, will be in charge of putting forward the education policy. And only at that point will it come to the committee where Jim and I sit, which is Ways and Means, which addresses the funding. So right now it's in the Senate Education Committee and in the House Education Committee. So if you want to have an impact on that process, those are the committees where you need to raise your voice to the committee leadership. If you Google on the website, you can see who those chairs are. You can see who the vice chairs are. That's the place you can share your thoughts. That process is continuing. And if you ever think about tide, how tide goes in and tide comes out, and in the middle, there's no movement at all. We're kind of in the middle right now. We're in a place of no movement where people are just trying to figure out which way to go. I was invited to speak about the shared services in both the House Ed and in the Senate Ed. They're hearing merger map proposals in the Senate Education Committee. And the ones that I shared were from the House Education Committee. So right now they're hearing about both of those. So the kinds of concerns that people have shared today, those are the kinds of concerns that people are starting to share now with those committees in the Senate and in the House, because it is those Senate and House Education Committees that are going to first come up with the policy around. I personally don't call it education transformation. Again, it's governance and finance transformation. But those are the committees that are going to make the decision about how we move forward before it then comes to the funding committee. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
I mean, actually, I saw them working on House 681 with having no closure without local school board approval.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of small things that big things. But.
Big things. And what we're asking you to do is go back and forward between where you are today, right? So the numbers that you saw for Thetford and Norwich, that's what the funding levels would be in your school. But Thetford School District and Norwich School District would not, or the Norwich School District, they wouldn't exist anymore in that new construct. So part of what you have to do, did that make sense to everybody? So the funding is still specific to the school, but the decisions will be made by new unified bigger boards. And so you have to sort of, sit here and squint into the future and think through those implications. And that's part of just the fact that it's so complicated is part of why I think a lot of people feel pretty paralyzed right now. Yeah. But we've had a lot of people stand up and just share really powerful testimony and insight, and it does make a difference. Yeah.
I just, 2 comments and a question. I have made comments to the school redistricting task force in the past. I'm from Corinth. I'm a parent of middle school.
Fantastic.
It's very stressful.
Nice.
I'm here as a school board member of Corinth. So it's not just Thetford and Norwich, but there are decision makers and community members for Thetford and Norwich, and I just really want to emphasize while I have the chance wherever I can that how important it is for our students to have choice to, especially to Thetford Academy. So wherever there are discussions about mergers, boundaries, cooperative service, those boundaries, please don't forget about us. It's extremely important that our kids have Thetford Academy as a choice for educational equity. And my other comment was I just want to say thank you to the task force for you're continuing on. You all have lives. You all have other things that you have to do, and be passionate about this. And looking to the facts and being clear-eyed about the implications and cutting through the politics, I think is incredibly. It's just really appreciated. And I guess my question is on this healthcare bargaining. Is there a bill that we can support?
Yes.
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we can.
Peter, I don't know if it's introduced this session, but it could be, and maybe what we need to do, they can bring it back. If Neil, if you could email, he's on the Norwich School Board, you can look in the Norwich School Board, or you can email me and I will mail you the draft bill. It's from another biennium, but it's a great bill. If you sent that bill to the chair of House Education, he's the person who introduced it. He would be very interested to hear that you supported it. I'm just telling you, because he didn't get traction, but he wrote the bill, so he'd be excited. Yeah, go ahead.
This is asking you to predict the future a little bit, but if come July, the House and Senate or the redistricting task force doesn't put forward a new set of maps that you're putting your stamp
We're
on.
done. We're done.
Okay, you're done.
Yep.
Right. What is Governor Scott currently saying that he will just move forward with enforcing something from his own maps that
he can't? What he's saying is that unless the this is the politics, right? Let's just be blunt. This is politics. This is not about policy. And what he's saying is he won't sign the budget for the state, which includes the education fund, if we don't give him maps. Notice, and when it was so fascinating, when the secretary presented those maps, she said the districting task force had requested those maps. We never requested those maps, Jay. But they don't want responsibility. What they want is the legislature to draw the maps. They don't want to draw the maps. And so we're in this, back and forth around that right now. And that's politics. That's not policy.
I agree. I don't think the legislature wanted to draw the maps. You just made the task. I knew that going in. I felt like we're just like cannon fodder. But I want to just add to the comment I made about contacting your legislators and leadership. I think it's important for you to tap into your networks too, because Norwich and Thetford don't get a whole lot of sympathy in this conversation. Yeah. This is redistribution. Act 127 was redistribution of funds, and it's really hard to explain to them that you've got a school at Marion Cross that is running nearly flat budgets year to year in terms of operating the school. But these costs that are out of our control are what's jacking everything up. And I think if you have friends in other towns, this word needs to get out that this thing is dangerous.
Yeah, and there are things we could do. I mean, there are districts. I feel very strongly there are a few districts, I'm not going to name names, that are grossly underfunding their schools, grossly. It's just not fair to those kids. There are ways to deal with that, even in the current funding formula. So, we should pay attention to that. Every kid does deserve a fair chance, right? We shouldn't be depriving kids of education. But there are other ways to approach that problem. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say, just as I'm a Thetford resident and a former Thetford Academy board member, but I think just like looking around the room, there are not enough current families of school-age children who are attending. Like, I've been to a couple of these things, and some of it is just demographically the population of our state. And I so appreciate everyone who's here. But like, if you're someone whose children attend schools, please have these conversations with the people in the pickup and drop-off line, with people at sports games. I can't tell you how many parents I've run into who have no idea that this is even happening. And I think some of it is like how busy people are and how oblivious and how the news cycle is just like this constant bombardment. Yeah, it's just like overwhelming and people shut off. But like there are so many people who have school-age children, as I do, who have no idea that this is even happening. And so I really appreciate everyone, who's here. But like, please tell people who have children in the schools that this is a real threat. I think there's a lot of just like this. It's conceptual and it's like it doesn't seem real.
And on that vein, I would also just say, thank you for serving on the school board. Or for those of you who do, it is a really hard job right now. And Nic was quite passionate about that issue and just about how challenging it was. He would pass a budget. They made some strategic decisions about using surplus to buy down tax rates because everyone was told they were getting a 12% increase. And then the legislature, Jim and I voted against it, we used $120 million to buy down budgets after people voted. The impact is you're going to get a double whammy this year. And he said, I can't even plan. Like, I can't even plan for my community because everything's so volatile right now. I don't even know what you're going to do with the buy downs. I don't know what's going to happen with healthcare. And it just makes it really difficult for school boards to make good long-term decisions because they don't know what's happening. And so just really do keep that in mind when you're talking to your educators who have to deal with this instability, when you're talking to your school heads, when you're talking to your school boards. It's a tough time, really tough.
One potentially important question, can you guys say how, we've talked about the funding formula and how that would cut per pupil spending. How will the money be raised? Will Act 60, Act 68 still be in place for raising the funds, or how would that work?
It's 6068 doesn't actually, it's been replaced by 127, which is still in the process of implementing. So these two districts here today will see an increase just associated with the shifting weights, which are still shifting. And that was designed to give more tax capacity to districts that have higher poverty
rates. Is the calculation in the same realm as it has been?
It will be more. It'll be more like that, but it won't be assessed over just your current district. It'll be assessed over that big district. So you may have a shift in your tax rate, but you will also, you're seeing what comes back to you is determined by the state. So the state will set the tax rate for the bigger merged district based on the total count of students in the weighted count. And then the district will have to decide. So let's say we have a big Windsor County district and it maps onto our legislative, hypothetical, not happening, hypothetical. The big district that includes all the communities in that district will have a new board with voting wards elected to represent all the communities in that district. And the money will be redistributed, but in that foundation amount. Because no one's going to say, we're going to give Norwich and Thetford more while taking it away from somebody else.
Okay. Jim mentioned off-ramps and stuff, and I just wonder how much do all you guys, what are the chances that you think that consolidated districts will be approved by the legislature?
Jim, crystal ball, who knows?
The probability, let's see, the probability that we will, by the time we adjourn in 1st of June or whatever it is.
Or July.
I've come up with a plan that we jointly, the House and Senate, agree to on consolidated districts.
Mandatory districts.
On a roll call.
Personally, I don't believe will happen.
You don't?
But while I'm on my feet, I want to add something commensurate with your comment about talk to people in the pickup line.
Yeah.
When I was a freshman, one of my mentors in the legislature asked a couple of us freshmen, why do we introduce a bill? Well, because we want to pass it. He said there are 3 reasons. We want to pass it, we want to start a conversation, we want to build a coalition. And as Neil knows, as Jay knows, it takes a long time to build a coalition to actually come up with something that we agree to. It may take a decade, it may take a couple of sessions. But the point being, I think, is commensurate with both of your questions, Carrie's too. It's going to take a long time for us to get from here to there. And also remember, which is not very helpful probably, but our realm in the legislature is words on a printed page. That's what we vote on. That may not embody the concept that we're trying to include. It may not embody all the sentiments of people that we talk to, that you talk to us. But our realm at the end of the day, yes or no, is words on a printed page, and it's never perfect. And so wish us well, because we're working as hard as we can.
But to go back to your point about implosion, if you feel that this is risky policy, you need to let people know, because this is, I mean, once you go down this route, there's no going back, right? So that's what you need to think about. BJ, you had a question, and then I'm going to let people close, and we can linger for a bit. But I know some people probably need to go home, so I don't want to hold us too late. Go ahead.
So I have the last question.
You get the last one.
Well, I've heard it mentioned a couple of times, the off ramps. But I've definitely heard about the letter writing, so I will take that to my
and the op-eds and the
but what, and I heard your comment, Jim, about, we have something, it might be better to amend it and work with it over time versus just scrapping it. But what are the next 2 or 3 off ramps? What would that be?
Well,
if
we don't have maps, we can't move forward with mergers. So I think the first thing is if the legislature implodes over coming up with maps, then this is stalled.
So
that's one. There's, or not. I mean, we just keep coming back until we hammer it out, until there's some compromise. There are signs that there's some acknowledgement that this aggressive timeline is actually harmful, right? Really harmful. And there's some, and at the same time, I don't think anyone on the task force thought there weren't places that actually do need to consolidate. And we outlined possible places where that made sense. It just, they weren't always where people thought made sense. And so what we're trying to encourage people is to take a deep breath, to look at the data. We actually have data now. The whole conversation last year took place without any data from the agency to support it. And now that there's evidence on the table and people are starting to say, okay, well, does this make sense? We're hoping everyone takes a deep breath and asks what's good for kids and what's good for communities and how is that going to affect the property tax. We've also been pushing hard. If you want to slow growth in cost, you have to hit the things that are driving higher costs. That's healthcare and housing. And we haven't talked about housing at all. But you know what? You know what would solve the problem of declining enrollment? Housing that young families could actually afford to live in. So one thing we have to think about, and when you look at which communities, there are a couple communities that are still growing, and then there's some like the two speaking tonight, where frankly with 15% growth, Norwich's grand list is actually declining now, interestingly. But the grand list growth has been so great, it's very difficult for families to come in right now. We need to take that really seriously, because not taking that seriously is committing to a community where young families can't live. So let's talk about housing. Let's talk about healthcare and how we tackle those. Because if we solve those 2 issues, we wouldn't have a school issue. What bothers me about this conversation is instead of dealing with the core drivers, the governor has shifted everything off onto schools, because guess what? That's your job. So he can blame you. But we need someone who can lead on healthcare, and we need someone who can lead on housing. So write about what you care for your schools, but please also hold us in the legislature, and please also hold the governor accountable for getting action on healthcare and housing, because we need it. And the CHIP proposal is going to take a long time to develop. People have very divided feelings about it. but we're now paying for housing out of the education fund, which means we're paying for housing off the property tax. That's about as regressive as you can get, right? We need to do better. We need to figure out better ways. One of the things that I'm worried about, and Jim and I are both working on this, there is an effort to break out the second home base. 1 in 5 homes in Vermont is a second home. That means 20% of our housing stock is not housing a family. That's crazy when you're in a crisis. And we've tried 6 ways to Sunday to get a rental registry out of the governor. You know, he vetoed it 3 times, I think, 3 times. We need to deal with that, because if you're tying up your housing in second home, and in our communities, those homes pay maybe 50 cents less in their tax rate. We're rewarding people for hoarding housing. And I'm sorry, we're in a crisis right now. And they should not pay less to take our housing off the market for families. And so we're really trying to break that out. We've been pushing like crazy. We are finally getting there. That is one of the dependencies that we're going to try to keep going in Act 73. That's the best thing in Act 73 as far as I'm concerned. We need to break that base out, because I can't tell you how many people in Thetford and Norwich in particular have told me that it really burns them to see empty housing that's only used on Dartmouth homecoming weekend, but is paying a lower tax rate and a much lower tax rate. So we got to deal with that kind of stuff. I'm going to let people go. We will all hang out. I just thank you to these people who work so hard on behalf of your communities. And thank you to Linda Gray for pulling this great conversation together. And thank you to Jam for preserving it. Yeah.